name is James Coughlin. So we're recording it. Okay. So I'll start over. My name is James Coughlin. I'm a legal director at Dell Technologies. I'm also on the board of directors here at the ACC and the chair of the NextGen committee. And I thought I'd just give a little bit of background on the NextGen committee before we get started. So it was a committee formed in 2017 as a platform for in-house lawyers with 10 years experience practicing or less to get together and just kind of talk about things and be able to benchmark and create a little camaraderie in the legal profession. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to get together tonight and actually do that, right? To benchmark ourselves and kind of learn from each other on this topic of how to use LinkedIn effectively and be able to accomplish our goals using that as a means to do so. One other thing I want to call out is thank you to our sponsor this year, Preti Flaherty, who's obviously done a great job of just being able to support us throughout the course of the program year. And one of the Preti lawyers is on the call today and can give us a lot of good insight. She's someone that I've learned from, as well as Paul, Alex, and Heather. So again, thank you to Preti for making a lot of this possible for us. And the last thing I'll say is, in court, I hope you go here at some point during the talk tonight. But as a chapter, we've done a lot over the course of the past couple of years to really revamp our social media model, and we've done a lot to use it as a way to engage with our membership, and actually just won an award as a chapter through the national ACC for that work. So obviously, it's a lot of work that Cord and other folks on that special board committee put into the process to be able to make that happen. So thank you, Cord. I'm just wanted to say that publicly. And if you feel like there's a need to go there, or might be helpful, relevant information for people, then I think that'd be a good place to go at some point. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cord, who's just going to introduce the topic a little more, and then turn it over to each panelist who will introduce themselves. So thanks again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you very much, James, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here. My name is Cord Silverstein. As James said, I will be one of the only people in this virtual meeting without a law degree here, and I really feel bad about it, really do. But the reason why is, as James had mentioned, why I'm here is that I'm a digital marketer. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I head up a digital marketing agency. And over the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to work with ACC Northeast board and members like yourself, really kind of revamping and really making the social media what you guys are doing today, which is really firing on all cylinders and doing a lot of great stuff. So I'm going to be the moderator here, and we've really brought together a bunch of just really smart folks to talk about kind of some of the experiences they have had as they are kind of wearing those hats of being both either in-house or outside counsel, and also when it comes to really engaging and utilizing and kind of growing their social media cred on different channels. So what I want to do is real quick is just to have each one of the people kind of introduce themselves, and then from there we're just going to have an open discussion. As we go, if anybody has any questions, absolutely please feel free to write in the chat window, submit any questions you have, and based on time and kind of what the conversation is, we'll try to get to as many as possible. So without further ado, let me turn this over to the folks you really want to hear and talk about. So why don't I start off with Alex? Why don't you introduce yourself, say hello, and talk to the folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cord. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Aferiat. I am legal counsel at the Boston Consulting Group. I'm also on the ACC Northeast Chapter Board. I serve as secretary as well as a co-chair of our Practice and Career Management Committee. Really excited for the conversation tonight. You have incredible, my fellow panelists, some people I have followed on LinkedIn for a while and some more recently, and I've been very impressed with their content, and I know there's a lot of really great ideas out there. So looking forward to this discussion.
Great, thank you. And now, Bodie, could you say hello, introduce yourself for everyone?
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Bodie Colwell. I'm the attorney at Preti Flaherty. I'm out of the Portland, Maine office, although occasionally I do travel down to the Boston office. My practice focuses on creditors' rights in bankruptcy and related litigation. I am happy to be the only outside counsel on the panel, or I'm honored to be the only outside counsel on this panel. And I come from both a personal use of social media, but I also am on the board of an organization for women in restructuring, and I am a director of communications. So we use social media to further the organization's goals. So I'm looking forward to talking about how we kind of make authentic social media messaging and how it furthers the brand of the organization and the individual members.
Great. Thank you, Bodie. Thank you very much. And Paul, care to say hello and introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Thanks, Cord. I'm Paul Connors. It's great to be here. I am VP of Legal and Corporate Secretary at Salsify, which is a SaaS company in the e-commerce space. I have experience with building and scaling tech companies, particularly SaaS companies, having spent time both at Athena Health and Bright Cove before my time at Salsify. Over about the past year or so, I've become much more involved in the ACC Northeast and also much more engaged on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Paul. And last but absolutely not least, Heather, care to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Cord. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Heather Stevenson. I am Deputy General Counsel to Boston Globe Media Partners. We're the parent company and publisher of the Boston Globe, boston.com, and staff.
It's a new idea, really, and next time I agree to take her.
Sorry, I'm getting some sort of echo. And I started, actively posting on LinkedIn a little over a year ago and have really been enjoying my time on the platform and the community that I've become a part of. And I'm excited to talk about it with all of you tonight.
Great. And why don't, Heather, since you were the last to introduce yourself, why don't we be the first one with a question? So could you share a little bit from the standpoint of your journey on social media, how you started, why you started, and any kind of key learnings or anything over this experience that you've kind of taken away from that has had a positive and or negative impact from the standpoint of your career?
Sure. That's a lot. I started on LinkedIn essentially as an experiment, and I sort of still think of it as an experiment. I joined a networking Zoom early in the pandemic with a few other in-house lawyers. You might know Alex Sue if you are on social media at all. He's become kind of the king of the memes. But he organized it, and he and some of the others on the call were active on LinkedIn and seemed to be enjoying it. And that inspired me to give it a try as well. It started as an experiment. I said that I would post one time per week and I could stop if I wanted to. And over the course of a little bit more than a year, it's gotten to be a lot of a faster process and a more fun process. And so I really enjoy it. I haven't stopped, and now I'm posting more like 2 times a week. In terms of benefits, there have been some really great tangible and intangible benefits. I started my practice in New York as a litigation associate, quit the practice of law, and opened a juice bar, and then went in-house. So that means that nobody in Boston really knew me, and people who did know me knew me as the juice lady, which is not particularly useful in terms of being a lawyer. So it's been a really great way to continue expanding my Boston-based network during a time when in-person networking hasn't been a possibility. I've connected with a number of people who have become mentors, both in terms of providing really specific, media law advice and guidance on thinking about my career, and others who just, more generally inspire me. I am not looking for a job, but I regularly get outreach from people who would like to hire someone like me. And I'm certain that I would not if I weren't active on LinkedIn, and I have, open to work turned off. So, if you're really active, I think that's, a great way to look for jobs. And then I've just met some people who have become friends, which is a really kind of nice added benefit. I didn't go on there looking for more friends. I have lots of in real life great friends, but it's kind of fun to be part of a community of LinkedIn creators who are also in-house lawyers or not, just looking to kind of build something new.
Great. Okay. Paul, let me ask you from the standpoint of, from your experience when it comes to social media, what would you tell other in-house and out-house counsel who may not be involved with social media that much or kind of a limited? Why do you think it's important that folks do participate in social media, in the LinkedIns of the world and so forth? And why, and do you believe it's important to really establish your professional brand on some of these channels?
Yeah, I do, Cord. And I mean, I think so much of it is just getting started. And I think, you know, as Heather was answering that first question, that's a lot of what I thought about. And I think I've known the value of LinkedIn for a long time, but I think it really did take for me the pandemic and some of the lack of personal connection really to commit to it and to become more involved. And I do think it's important. I mean, I think it's important to build your own personal brand, and it's a platform to help build the other brands that are close to you, both of your company, if you're an in-house attorney, or just other causes that you might care about. And sort of doing all of that, it all sort of comes together to help elevate your own brand as well. And so I have found a lot of the same benefits that Heather described, for sure.
Great. So I want to, for Alex and Bodie, I'd like you, both of you, to take this next question. This next question comes to us from the brand spanking new ACC Northeast new president, Miss Stephanie Lambert. All right. So since she's the president, we absolutely have to take her questions. Right. So Alex, why don't we start with you with, when it comes to social media, how do you kind of go about figuring out, deciding what topics you're going to talk about and what exactly you're going to share online?
That's a really good question. Certainly for me, I think I prefer to talk about topics that are really important to me. You know, I know obviously there are some things where people feel compelled to weigh in on because it's what everyone is talking about. I can't deny that there have been times that I might have done that, but for me, it's you know, causes that matter to me, things that are going on at my company that really matter to me are the types of things that I post about on LinkedIn. And I also think just in general, like for my own story, I now co-host, or I host and now co-host a podcast that the ACC runs called Around the In-House, where we talk to other in-house lawyers about their careers and their passions. And it's been a really great experience and has been a great way to, I think, sort of stimulate discussion on social media about topics that are relevant to other in-house lawyers. And not just in-house lawyers. I think it's broadly applicable to the legal profession in general, but the particular struggles, especially during the pandemic, of being remote and not being able to connect with your team, and also juggling all the other things that people were juggling during that time. That was something that I found really valuable to talk about on social media, and certainly the podcast was a great platform to sort of launch that discussion. So I think you know, this is maybe a topic we're going to explore more later in the discussion, but the topics that I would focus on are the ones that are authentically you. I think are the ones that will make for the strongest, you know, just the strongest post and the strongest discussion. But Bodie, I would love your thoughts too.
I totally 100% agree. The things you care about is what you should talk about. If you're talking about things that you don't care about at all, that's going to be clear to both your reader, and you're not going to stick with it. It's not going to be pleasurable for you. It's not going to be an enjoyable experience. I really love trumpeting other women in restructuring. So I love reposting other people's things and then writing a whole paragraph about why I love her. Like, because that doesn't happen a lot in real life, right? So if we are constantly acknowledging each other's successes on this platform in a genuine way, not in kind of a fake, annoying way, then that really lifts each other up. And that's what I think the great thing about LinkedIn is, right? We're in a professional setting, but we can provide that kind of remote mentoring, like Heather said, remote menteeing. So that's what I really like to post about. I like to talk about lifting other people up, especially women in the bankruptcy and restructuring space. And that's kind of where I find my joy. So that's kind of flowing from what Alex was talking about. You need to talk about something that you actually generally feel happy about. Because if you just follow like a template that's like, this is what you should post on LinkedIn, and it's just a form or something like that, that's not going to be enjoyable for anybody to read. But it's also not going to be that much fun for you to put out into the world. And it certainly doesn't reinforce your brand.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Under that same line of questioning, Heather, I'd love to get your feedback on. So Heather, you and I just met several weeks ago and we kind of got together to discuss this thing. And then you and I connected on LinkedIn, and I've been following you since then and been reading and enjoying a lot of the stuff that you write. And one of the things I really find interesting when it comes to a lot of your writing is that while we're on LinkedIn, and as Bodie said, the kind of professional network, you bring a lot of yourself into your writing. You talk about, some things that maybe wouldn't be considered professional or straight in line kind of stuff. My question, I guess I have for you is that, where is that line from the standpoint of how much you give and show, of yourself, professional Heather, and what I do for a living versus, the regular human being breathing Heather as well. How do you kind of balance that, and what are your thoughts?
That's such an important question, and something I actually think about a lot. I think I have some rules for myself that other people don't, and they're just what works for me. So I do talk a lot about personal things, or not exclusively professional things. But for example, you'll never see I post about my son, but I don't post his name, and I don't post a picture of his face. That's a privacy thing for him, and it's just my choice. A lot of people do that differently. In terms of what I am willing to post, I think, people don't go to LinkedIn to just read something that they could read in a book or in a traditional blog post. If somebody's going to LinkedIn to learn, for example, about a specific aspect of media law, the area I practice, that's a problem. Like, let's redirect them to a source that's really focused on that. I think LinkedIn is so much better for bringing your unique perspective. So a lot of what I talk about is professional, and like how I think about communicating with my colleagues, or how I think about responding to a difficult counterparty. But I think people want to know who they're listening to. That's what makes LinkedIn unique compared to reading a book. If they just wanted just the facts, they would go to the book. But they want to understand whose perspective they're hearing. They're on LinkedIn to get new perspectives. And so I will share things like, a way an experience with my son made me think. I talked about that recently, about an experience painting rocks and how he had the greatest time. And it reminded me that we never know, what's most important to our kids. And I think it's important to talk about causes that are important to yourself, or at least for me it is. I've been talking a lot about mentoring and offering mentoring opportunities. So I think, I keep in mind that everything I put on LinkedIn is truly public, and that, I would never say anything I didn't want a future employer to see. I would never say something about someone I didn't want that person to see. And then I have the rules about sort of family privacy, but there's not that much that's off limits for me.
Great. And Paul, let me ask you, from the standpoint of kind of taking what Heather said and kind of go a little further, is that have you ever run into or dealt with any challenges from the standpoint of kind of being able to communicate and share things on social media, but also at the same time knowing that, you're a general counsel, you represent an organization and so forth, and there might be some people within that organization who might be a little more conservative, may not feel comfortable when it comes to social media, and might have some concerns or hesitations. Have any of those red flags ever popped up with you, and how have you dealt with that, if so?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think for me it really has. I mean, I think I'm fortunate to work at a company and really in an industry where I think we all employees really are encouraged to be themselves, right? There's this whole concept of bring your whole self to work. And it's up for debate what that really means during the pandemic. But I mean, one thing that might mean is bringing your whole self to your online presence, you know, LinkedIn and otherwise. And I know when I think through the kinds of things that I like to post about, you know, I think of it that every post is sort of an opportunity to provide your network and beyond with a glimpse into your own life. And, you know, Alex mentioned the word authenticity, and Bodie touched on it too, that I think that's so important. And that's part of what makes LinkedIn and social media so powerful. And I think if you feel comfortable enough to be yourself, that authenticity really will shine through. And just as an example, you know, from my own life, right? Everyone who knows me knows that I'm big into puns and dad jokes. And I am totally comfortable posting about that on LinkedIn. It humanizes me, right? To Heather's point, that it's not just someone who's this sort of, I'm this straight shooter general counsel, you know, that I have a personality, you know, I'm human just like others. And I think on the point of, you know, folks who think that there might be some risk to posting or being more involved on LinkedIn, I really flip that on its head because of some of the benefits that we've already talked about. Like I frame it as, you know, what are the risks to not getting involved? Will you achieve your career goals, or will you achieve your career goals in the timelines that you've set for yourself if you don't do these sorts of things to build up your brand?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Thank you. I'd like to get feedback from the entire panel on this next question, because I think this is one that a lot of the attendees will really be interested in hearing your feedback on, which is specifically from the standpoint of if you would recommend to some folks who maybe haven't kind of dipped their toe into the social media waters that much, or maybe they have gone as far as have a LinkedIn profile, but maybe nothing more other than that. Where would you guys, based on your trial and errors and your experience, where would you start from? What would your recommended first couple of steps, so maybe they can kind of dip their toe in without having to dive right into the deep end? Bodie, can I start with you, please?
Sure. I think a good way to, I mean, if you read Heather's posts, they're so genuine, they're so beautifully written, and they're so vulnerable, and they're beautiful. But that seems scary. Like, I don't want to, like, sometimes I think, oh, I can't be vulnerable on social media, right? The easiest thing to do is to start liking things, and then start using emojis, and then commenting on things, and then you're reposting things, and then you're participating a little bit, right? So you repost to something that someone else said. Maybe I repost what Heather said, and I'm like, this is a really beautiful thing she's written. I want everybody in my network to see. And then it starts to feel more and more comfortable. You don't need to like jump right in with a whole blog post about something that's very sensitive to you. It's kind of popping up in other people's feeds, giving them an opportunity to interact with you, that starts to build that network and build that familiarity that's so important now that we're all still, I mean, look at our videos, we're all still locked in our homes and not having interaction in the office. So it's that kind of, that the culture bit, right, is what you're looking for.
Okay, great. Heather, since Bodie brought you up and talked about your beautiful writing and so forth, share with us some tips and tricks you've picked up along the way.
Sure. And thank you, Bodie. That was very nice of you to say. So I actually totally agree. You don't have to start writing personal things. You can absolutely start with strictly professional, start with liking and commenting on other things. I think that's great. I think LinkedIn is a great place to start and is the focus here. But if you are more comfortable on Twitter, I think there's also kind of a rapidly evolving and growing network of lawyers on Twitter, and that could be a perfectly reasonable place to start too, particularly if you're somebody who is concise. I am not concise enough for Twitter, you won't find me there. The other thing I would say is again, if you're not comfortable with it, don't start with the personal posts. But if you want to make an impact, or if you want to get a lot of likes or go viral, the personal posts are actually really effective. So not that you would ever write one specifically for that, but my most popular post, my first like really popular post was about failure and how I started this juice bar and had this big plan to have 10 locations, and I totally failed and the juice bar is closed and now I'm back to practicing law. And people loved it. And then my other absolutely most popular of all times is about how friends joke that I'm too nice to be a lawyer. And that one just like went viral and has 500,000 views. So if you're not comfortable with it, no need to do the personal things. But if you want to be seen and meet a wider network and also just make an impact in a unique way, I think telling some of those stories, the vulnerability, at least for me, has turned out to be worth it. But it took me a long time to get there.
Great, thank you. Alex, go right ahead with your thoughts, please.
No, I completely echo what Bodie and Heather said. I think one, sort of slightly different angle I'll take with the question is, when you're thinking about if you're hesitant to get on social media, and whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Twitter, I think it's important to think about what your goal is. If it's are you looking for a new job? Because if you're looking for a new job, LinkedIn to me is the best place that you should be looking. And modifying your profile, this is something I just talked about on my LinkedIn the other day. It's really how I credit getting my role at BCG. Is I took some advice from a friend who said, update your LinkedIn profile, make it clear in your bio what role you're looking for and the types of experiences that you've had that are exactly relevant to the jobs that you're applying for. And that's what I did. And to this day, I am now friends with my recruiter who hired me, and he has confirmed my suspicions that that was a huge part of why I was flagged. So, it's thinking about your goal. So maybe it's not finding a job, maybe it's, more to Heather and Bodie's point, it's about making meaningful connections. And so that I do think it's important to, sort of dip your toe into interaction. But it also could be recruiting. Maybe you're looking for new people to join your team. Maybe you're not looking for your own job. So I think it's really thinking about what your goal is and then figuring out the best avenue to kind of build on that goal. And, again, I know we focus mostly on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, again, for recruiting is a hugely valuable asset. But, to find people who have like minds or experience in the work that you're trying to do, you could also find that on Twitter. And I think it's just a really important way to kind of get yourself involved is to really just frame it in the mind of your goal.
Great. Okay, thanks. And Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I agree with what folks say, and I think there are ways to sort of ease into it. And I would say, just for folks who are at the point where they're thinking about starting to post on their own, their sort of own original content, I would just say, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I think if to the extent there is some fear or reluctance to get involved, I think all of the panelists, we would all tell you that we have had posts that have been less well received than others, right? Some flop. And I think, short of the post being just totally inappropriate content, it just doesn't really matter, right? I think the risk really is pretty low. If you have a post that doesn't get many views or much engagement, like, you just sort of move on, right? And it's just, I just don't think it's that much of a risk getting involved. And I would just say, to end, I think for those folks who are thinking about starting to post to build your own brand, one good opportunity might be to connect with the folks who are in the panel today and maybe making your first post about this event.
Nice. Absolutely. Absolutely. And just for an inside joke and so forth, all of the panelists and myself are going to write about Bodie's changing clothes a couple of times before we let you all in. Okay. So, and again, totally inside joke, so my fault. But moving on. I'd love to, I think you said something really important, Paul, that I'd like to ask another question and get each one of your feedbacks on when it comes to engagement. So I feel like that when it comes to social media, there's kind of a two-step thing. So that first step is to dip your toe into that water and start sharing and sharing a part of yourself and sharing content. And then the kind of second part and I think with this could be even the more challenges now to get engagement, to get people to comment, to create a conversation, to like it, to share it, and so forth. And I think one of the things that I have seen each one of you do really, really well is that not only do your posts get a lot of visibility, but one of the reasons why it gets a lot of visibility is because you guys create a lot of additional conversations on top of those original posts. So could you share with us some of your, how are you doing that from the standpoint of encouraging folks to comment, share, and so forth, and really create a two-way conversation on some of your posts? Heather, would you start us off with that?
Sure. So I think the most obvious way that people don't always focus on is ask a question. So I'll, share something or a thought or an idea, and at the end say, like, how do you think about this? Or what's a different approach? Other ways that you can get a lot of engagement are disagreeing with a commonly held view. I think that's something that, it is useful if you're doing it because you think you have value to add. I think there are certain people who do it just to be provocative. And that's not always particularly effective, but putting out a unique perspective is a really great way to get debate going. That I saw Stephanie asked a question in the comments about how to deal with naysayers, and that can sort of bring out some trolls. But as long as you are careful with how you engage in the comments, it can really get a great discussion going. And my favorite thing is when there'll be a separate conversation going on in the comments that I'm not even part of. That's like a real success. I think another way to get conversations going on is one of the best first steps for getting on LinkedIn to begin with, which is make sure you're engaging with other people before you start posting, or not, but it's an easy way to get started. Those people are going to see your posts. They're going to appreciate that you've been commenting on their posts and come talk to you. It really has to be a community. You're not just a publisher. You need to talk to other people on their posts too, and that really helps with engagement.
Great. Alex, what are your thoughts when it comes to kind of creating that two-way conversation?
I completely echo Heather's, and I should, clarify that I view myself, much less of a content creator than she is. I post mostly about the work that I'm doing at BCG and things related to the ACC. But I would say, especially for people who feel maybe less, I don't want to say less inclined, but sort of less able to build that sort of organic network of new voices on social media, relying on your actual network that you already have in your immediate surroundings. So for me, obviously the ACC is a huge, I'm very active in the ACC Northeast. There are several folks on this who are attending today who are members of the ACC Northeast. And so for me, it's seeing their posts and engaging with those posts and having those folks engage with me can expand the conversation. It doesn't just have to be, obviously there is huge value to going out and meeting new faces and seeing new perspectives, but having some sort of friendly conversation with those that you work regularly, and maybe it's not the ACC, maybe it's people I work with. My general counsel of BCG is extremely active on LinkedIn, and so I will engage with her posts a lot. And I think it's a great way to reinforce, sort of IRL relationships when you are on social media. You have those conversations, and sometimes they're talking about things maybe you wouldn't have a conversation about in person. So I do think relying somewhat on your sort of personal network is a good way to get that conversation going.
Great. Okay. And Bodie, what about your thoughts?
What is always kind of a good starting point for me is if there's something I'm generally interested in, like Alex and I were talking about earlier, that maybe question something. So I read an article and it was really interesting, and then I had a thought about it. So I would repost that article and then write a couple paragraphs, and then, like Heather said, invite other people. Like, what did you think of it? This was my approach. It seemed to be different than what the author was saying, but what it was everybody else think. Kind of asking other people's reaction. So posting my reaction, asking other people's reaction, and that kind of gets the message flowing. Whether it's something that's like a legal issue, like, something about the bankruptcy code, which is the most boring to everyone but me, or like something from, Harvard Business, like an interesting approach to a problem, or even a problem that you're facing as a person, a problem you're facing in work and in life, maybe as a parent. I think that right now there's some really amazing people who are parents who are posting about their experience parenting in a way that we have not seen before, especially because we're locked in our houses with our children, but in a way that is more vulnerable, because I think for a long time it felt like you left, like Paul was saying, you want to be your authentic self at work. You left your parenting hat at home. I have my business lawyer hat here, but those hats are the same. It's just like a forward baseball cap versus a backwards baseball cap, right? Like the skills that make me a good parent are the same skills that make me a pretty competent lawyer. A good parent, competent lawyer. That was a joke. I can hear you all laughing. Yeah, so that's what I would say. I would say a problem that came up at work, a problem you're facing in real life, or jumping off from an article, something that made you think, something that you disagreed with, or maybe challenge your thoughts about something, and then see where it goes.
Okay, great. And Paul, how about you? Any good feedback or thoughts on how to create that engagement and that conversation?
Sure. So first, I would just agree with what everyone else has said. In particular, a tactic that I employ is asking a question right at the end of a post, and of course engaging with others. Also, I guess I would just sort of pull on a thread that Bodie mentioned. That I do think really to the extent you're posting original content, the content itself can spark responses, can be engaging. And one way that I've found, of posting about something that really resonates with people is this concept of being vulnerable. And it can come from, as Bodie was saying, talking about our experience as parents. And there are lots of other parents in my network. People, can relate to that. And as an example, I think a post of mine that had particularly good engagement was one where I did share an article about the pandemic and how this is sort of an opportunity for us, for everyone, to sort of rethink our priorities and what we really want with our careers and in life generally. And, I was vulnerable in that post. And, I said something that I've learned during the pandemic is sort of how much physical health, like nutrition and fitness, together with spending time in nature is so important for my overall well-being. And I don't think I even posed a question. Maybe I did pose a question at the end of that, but I think that even if I hadn't, I think just that vulnerability, that ability for people, posting about something that just resonates with folks, I think has more of a tendency to get the kind of engagement that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Paul, while I have you here, I'd love Gretchen had a really interesting question. I'd love you to start us off with this one, which is she asked, do you and how do you address when it comes to social media, kind of walking that fine line between kind of the corporate brand messaging and then kind of in addition to, or in a parallel path, your personal brand as well. So do you wear a couple different hats when it comes to, you have your GC hat on, you have your, Paul Connors brand, professional brand. How do you approach that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't really think of it as different hats. I mean, I think of it as sort of the whole thing is me, and what I choose to put out there. I sort of alluded to it earlier, but it sort of all comes together to sort of build your personal brand. And I do post about things that my company is involved in, or projects like Alex that I'm involved with at my company or my industry and our customers and partners. And At the same time, I post about more personal things. And I just think all of that coming together is me. And that's the online presence that I want to create. And part of the benefit of doing that is that you control the narrative, right? It sort of, Heather said she has her own rules of the road, and other people have different rules. And you just you try out different things, and you find what works for you. And ultimately, if you're enjoying it, right? If you're posting about things that you're into, that comes through. And I think ultimately has the benefits that we talked about.
Okay, great. Good. Alex, you care to jump in?
Yeah, I just had one other point on that same question, because I think, one thing that I think has changed a little bit in just sort of certainly for myself, when I was looking for a new job, is sort of people's desire to align their personal values with their employer. I think is broader, it's more important to people now than I think it used to be. So the question about posting, about your personality or your personal life versus the brand that you work for, or the firm or the company that you work for. I think if you're working somewhere where you're really happy with, so your values are aligned to your employer, I think it becomes much easier. And certainly that's how I feel. I mean, BCG has been a terrific place for my career, but they also, they are very big about supporting like the Pride Network as a company. And that's been fantastic for me personally. And I think that there's a lot of ways that you can, sort of going back to something Heather had said at the very beginning about, something you don't want your future employer to see, if there's something that you're talking about personally, there's definitely a difference between being vulnerable and being controversial. I wouldn't badmouth my company on social media, but I do think that it's important to be your authentic self. And if that aligns to your company's values, then there's no reason to feel like you have to wear separate hats.
Gotcha. Great. Heather, I'd like to ask you from the standpoint of another question that came in that you had brought up earlier regarding that Stephanie had asked, which is, what are your rules when it comes to kind of how you deal with either naysayers or just plain old negative comments, up to and including, trolls and folks that just want to be a flamethrower for just being a flamethrower. So how do you deal with this, knowing that, you have to wear that professional hat and so forth, but also you are talking about a lot of things that are personal to you as well. How do you kind of balance that?
Sure. So I would say I hadn't really dealt with any trolls at all until very recently. And I think that's important for everyone to know. The LinkedIn community is generally extremely kind, extremely professional, and you are not likely to deal with trolls unless you go looking for them or you have a post blow up. And that's what happened to me. I had a post that was very successful, and then a guy with 60,000 followers didn't like it and reshared it and called it corporate gobbledygook. And the people in his comments just went nuts with completely unprofessional things. And so I'm acknowledging that now. I did not acknowledge that post on LinkedIn because I didn't think there was any value to it. In terms of just negative comments or disagreements, when they're respectfully done, I love them. On that same post, actually, the first couple of comments were sort of disagreements or questions with it. And I actually messaged the people who had posted those things to say thank you. It's awesome to get people agreeing, but it's also really nice when there's a real discussion. So I think if there is kind of a respectful disagreement, that is terrific. And that's one of those times when you get, the real conversations going in the comments. And then if there are people who I would qualify more as trolls or just looking to, be a pain, you have a few options. I rarely delete a comment, but you can delete a comment, or I just ignore them. And people don't tend to pay much attention to them.
Great. Okay. And Bodie, any experience or things that you could recommend regarding either naysayers all the way up to trolls?
I think you got to know your tolerance level, right? So you got to know you before you post something that's potentially controversial, something that could, you know what people are going to react to, right? And if you're posting something that you are not comfortable defending or not comfortable having disagreements about. And it's okay if that's your personality, then know that about yourself and kind of tailor your post to not necessarily welcome that engagement. There's always going to be like some garbage, right? Every once in a while. And you can just scroll past the garbage. But it's like this happened a lot last summer about Black Lives Matter. People were posting about Black Lives Matter, and then other people would come in and start to, and people they didn't even anticipate in their network would be negative. This happened to a couple of friends of mine, and it turned into a whole thing. And people just had to step back because they realized they were going to a place that they were not comfortable with. They weren't comfortable. They knew their beliefs, but they were starting to take a turn that they weren't comfortable in the way that they were expressing them. And I think so much of this is about being genuine to yourself and knowing your comfort level and being vulnerable, but also like how much fighting do you really want to do? Are you a middle child or are you a first child? Like it's where do you fall there?
Yeah. Okay, great. I'd love to get everyone's thoughts on from the standpoint of so these days, whether you're talking about interviewing for a new job, whether you're talking about, pitching a business or work or anything, usually when you meet someone for the first time these days, whether it's interview or anything else, usually one of the first steps someone does is they type your name into Google and you do a Google search and do this. So I guess my question for you guys is that, we've talked a couple different times today about how, that line of how much you share, is different for everyone. Is there any concerns or have you had any concerns that as you've been typing maybe a more personal subject or something that you've maybe had a little tinge in the back of your mind saying, what happens if, in 2 years from now, I'm interviewing for a big job and someone does a Google search and finds these articles or sees these things or things like that, whatever. Do you have these concerns? Are they valid? And I think just a lot of the members that are watching might feel that way, that something they write about, will catch up to them kind of down the road. Paul, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, Cord, because a particular post comes to mind for me where I sort of did think those kinds of things through. And so the post I'd said I am comfortable generally posting about dad jokes. And so I took a photo of one of those Little Tykes toy plastic slides, right, for little kids that I had on my back porch, right? And I'd said, this is the slide deck I sent to my team at work today. And there was a photo of that. And I thought about that, because I actually initially made that post on a different social media platform, and then was reminded of it when it came up in an anniversary. And I thought long and hard about this, and I convinced myself that because it was office related slide deck, that I would do it and go for it. And when I had those thoughts about whether I actually do that, not that it's controversial, but it's just sort of, it's silly, right? But when I had those thoughts, basically what I said to myself was, if a future employer sees this, a prospective future employer sees this, I want to work at the kind of place who sees this and says like, hey, I think we'd like to have this guy around, right? So it's sort of, it's again, the risk of not doing this kind of thing, right? That's just the kind of place I want to work at. Someone who can accept me for who I am.
Awesome. I could not agree more. Heather, definitely for someone I think that, who really puts herself out there in some posts. At times, have you ever kind of, again, been a little concerned about maybe you went too far or this might come back to bite you down the road?
Basically what Paul said. I think the bigger concern is, what if you don't say it? I'm okay with not working for an employer who wouldn't like what I post. because I don't think I post anything that crosses any lines. I think there is probably there are lines I would not cross in terms of how personal I would go. People choose different things. I think, talking about certain really personal things is perhaps riskier. I talk about things like failure, but not in a way that any employer I would want to work for would be bothered by. And the funny thing is, I used to work for a white shoe, very conservative law firm, and I hear from all sorts of former colleagues there who are still there about how much they love my posts. So if they don't have a problem with them, I kind of think, yeah, I'm just not too concerned by it. Maybe it's a privileged position to feel, but there's always another employer.
Absolutely. Gotcha. Okay, Bodie, any thoughts on that?
Paul said it perfectly. Like, if you're if you're looking for a new job, you're not happy with your current job. So nothing's not working right. So you want to be in a place that fits you, where you can be your authentic self at work. And I think, Paul had it right. It's knowing where the line is, you're not posting really offensive things or things. Engaging things are not offensive things. And especially if we're lawyers are used to arguing a lot. Like, we should be able to have civilized discussions online. It's when the post starts to get into uncomfortable situations that you need to say, oh, okay, this is not this. Do you want your grandmother to see it? That's kind of the old line, right? So I think to a certain extent, you're tailoring your message in a professional setting, and we're all grown up, so we can probably figure out where the line is without worrying about, a professional employer. I think, you got to just be yourself. I think otherwise you're spending years worrying about what people think of you that are hypothetical people that exist in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Alex, I'd love to ask you a little other question that came in through the chat from Amy, which is that what are your thoughts on, from the standpoint of, when it comes to the different social channels? She asked for alignment or segregation between different platforms, for example, Facebook versus LinkedIn or any of these other platforms. How do you approach that from the standpoint of playing in different pools? And, do you see, from the standpoint of one more important than the other, or how do you differentiate each one?
That's a really great question. If I understand Amy's question, I'm thinking it's asking whether you sort of have a different persona in different social media channels. And for me, I think the answer is no. I think maybe the content is different. So certainly on LinkedIn, I am talking more about I am talking more about my professional life, because that is the community that's on LinkedIn. But whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, I think being sort of your authentic self in each of those channels is really, really important. And I think it was Paul who spoke earlier about sort of building your personal brand. I think that's kind of the best way to do it, if that's something that's important to you, is to sort of carry that thread through. And it doesn't mean that you have to reshare the same post on all, whatever social media platform you're on. You can have different conversations and different content in different places, but as long as it's still authentically you, I think there's no reason to segregate that. I think, there is, again, I think it was, Heather and Bodie and Paul have all talked about sort of your own personal line. If there are things that are very personal to you that you don't want to share, you can make one of those other channels private. That's completely acceptable. But I think it's really just a personal question of how you want to portray, your personal brand. And so for myself, I think, again, I feel like I know that we focus so much on LinkedIn, so I hate to continue to go down that road, but I talk about things that are really important to me in my profession and my experiences in my profession. And I might talk about some of the same things in just a different context on Facebook or on Twitter. But just obviously a slightly different audience and different groups of people that are listening. So that's how I would handle that.
Can I jump in? I have a little example of this kind of
Please.
being yourself over everything. So Alex just reminded me, when I was applying at the firm, I lateraled over from another firm, and maybe 6 months before I lateraled over, I went to New York Comic Con. So on my personal Instagram and Facebook were photos of my husband and I at New York Comic Con. People in crazy outfits, people dressed up. We didn't dress up really. I don't think so. I don't think we dressed up at all, actually. Like, you know, we just kind of wore outfits. And so this was something that I was like, oh, my Facebook's locked down, my Instagram's locked down, you know, no professional employee, even though, I mean, it wasn't controversial. It's just like, you know, pictures of people in crazy outfits, right? So it turned out that one of my Facebook friends was, or someone who followed me on Instagram, was an attorney at that firm. And she had shared my photos from Comic-Con with the hiring partner. Like, he had asked her, hey, do you know Bodie? And she was like, oh yeah. And I found this out because 2 years later, he came into my office and I had a print in my office of like Batman and Robin from the 60s on my wall. And he goes, oh, where'd you get that? And I said, oh, I got that at New York Comic Con. It was this artist. And he's like, oh yeah, you're really into dressing up and doing weird stuff, huh? And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you dress up, you go to comic conventions. And I was like, I do? Like, I was like, how, first of all, and it took me a couple days to realize kind of the path. I was like, I've been to one, like this isn't my identity, but that's kind of goes back to it, right? So even if you think you have like a personal brand and then a professional brand or a personal realm, like those realms cross over in a Venn diagram all the time. Yeah. So you're either yourself everywhere or you're in lockdown everywhere. And that's kind of at the end of the day, I was like, huh, what was that? And obviously it didn't prevent me from getting the job, but, and it wasn't like a snafu or anything. It was just like a weird, like I had thought things were more private and they're not, not at all.
Okay, so the question I have is that the person who shared that picture with you and stuff, is that, are you still friends with that person? Because do you consider that person a friend
yeah.
who shared that? You know,
I never mentioned it to her. I mean, she was an attorney who worked with the hiring partner, and we went to the same law school, and he was probably like, hey, do you know so-and-so? And she was probably like, oh yeah. And, you know, I mean, it's perfectly fair for when hiring to check someone's social media to see if they're posting things that you don't want your company to. I mean, I don't know from a legal standpoint if that's fair, but I know that people do that now, and it seems to be something that happens. So yeah, I've never mentioned it to her. I just thought it was funny. I'm my authentic self at work, so that's who I am.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it at your authentic self, Bodie, but we are out of time today. I want to absolutely thank our panel, Alex Aferiat, Bodie Colwell, Paul Connors, Heather Stevenson. Thank you guys so much for your time. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you, all the attendees, for coming. I hope you found this interesting as well. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.